Today I'm going to be doing a little bit of a study similar to this one, probably similar in size. I'll show you how to build the armature. As far as materials, I have some soft aluminum wire. This is about 14 gauge. This is Chavant NSP medium clay. And then I also have some pliers with wire cutters. So let's go ahead and get some wire. I'll do it about the same size as this. So I'll go just a little bit taller. And then cut 5 lengths of wire for all of the fingers and the thumb. And these ones, they don't have to be exact. We're going to be cutting off any excess wire later. Just get them about where you want them. And then how I like to do it, to connect these wires, you could take all of the wires and just twist them together a little bit below where the wrist is going to be. That's one thing that you could do, but what I found is easier, especially if you're working with thicker wires, is just doing 2 at a time. So we're just going to leave about that much space for the hand. The hand might be a little bit smaller than that. So I just twist down a little bit till it's like this X right there. And then I'll do that with another 2 wires. And this just makes weaving the wires together just a little bit easier. So the same thing with another 2 wires until I feel like they're kind of solidly together. And then I put those 2 X's together and spin together the tails of the first set and the second set. So I just spin together these, and that kind of combines them in a way that gets a good attachment. Go down a little bit. Same thing with the other 2 ends. We'll twist those together. And then after you go down a little bit, you can switch back if you want and do the other, like mix them together again. So there we have 4 wires that are twisted together. So now with this last wire, this one will be the thumb. We're going to stick it in about halfway down the forearm and just wrap it tightly, as tight as we can get it. We'll just wrap it up to the wrist. And this one, it's okay because it's going to be the thumb. It's okay if it's a little bit shorter than the other wires. So just like that. And there we have a hand. When I was in college studying sculpture, they gave us pre-made armatures for like the full figure. And I think now, looking back on that, I think that's like criminal to not teach students how to actually make the armatures, because that's like one of the main things of being working as a sculptor, is being able to make your own armatures. I've just gone through and bent out the wires. I see that some wires are like longer, and I'll put the longest wire for the middle finger. And then I'll just hold the wire up, and I'm going to get kind of close to the camera, so it'll be a little bit blurry. But then I just hold it up and check, putting the wires at my wrist, and then just the other wires down the lengths of my fingers to see how the tips of the wires look. Usually there'll be some that are a little bit too long, some that are too short. Let's see. This one's actually not terrible. But if you have one finger, let's say that the pinky is just too long, you just use your pliers with wire cutters and just cut off any extra wire. The fist is a good one because it is tricky. And for this, I'm just going to use my own hand as a reference. And then I also have a mirror here that I'm able to kind of see. Some angles are a little bit harder to see from your perspective when you're looking at your own hand, using your own hand as a reference. The first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and find the knuckles. So a quick and easy way to do this is find about the midpoint of the middle finger, from the top of the middle finger down to the wrist. Halfway is going to be about where that first knuckle is. Usually a pretty close estimate to where that first knuckle is. Then you cut that in half again. It's going to be the next knuckle. And then cut that last part again for the last knuckle. And that is about where those knuckles are going to be found. And then I'm going to think about a curving rhythm that connects these knuckles, which it kind of curves, peaks at the middle finger, and then curves down as it moves towards the other fingers. You'll also notice that I'm trying to keep the separation in between the fingers. A common mistake is to lose some of the width in between these fingers. But the knuckles themselves, especially on male hands, they're larger than we realize. So if you try to like bunch the fingers together too tight, it just looks strange. But it's a common mistake in sculpting. Give your fingers some space to breathe. So the same thing with the thumb. It's about halfway up for that first knuckle. Halfway right there. We'll make a little bend. Somebody mentioned that they struggle with the thumb, which is understandable. It starts at the wrist, so sometimes we don't even think about that. We don't think that the thumb starts at the wrist. We might think that it starts like right here. But no, the thumb itself, the joint of the thumb starts down here at the wrist, which is why all of those wires separate at the wrist. And that's an important thing, because if you were to, let's say, wind this wire up so that it's coming out of the fingers like up here on that first finger, like all of this is really just fleshy, muscles and some fat pads and stuff, but it's not where the joint is. The joint's down here. So as you're making the armature, just one tip to not get the thumb off on the wrong track is to make sure that it is starting at the wrist. And then the fist, we'll get into this more as we actually start sculpting, but it also changes quite a bit depending on if you're clenching, if it's a clenched fist or if it's a relaxed fist. Let's go ahead and add in some more information in the form of clay just to get things built out a little bit, and then we'll go ahead and finish posing the armature. And so we're thinking about kind of a boxy shape for the wrist. That we're thinking this is like a box that's a little bit wider from side to side, a little bit narrower from front to back, and kind of flat, especially flat on the back side of the hand. And now I'm going to take some clay and just lay in this fat pad inside the hand, just to give an idea of this mass right in here. And then thinking about the curves, the curve on the inside of the palm. So even though this is like a mass that comes out a little bit more, there's still a general inside curve here on the palm, and then also a curve from low to high, from the outside to the inside middle finger, being the high point of that. So if you can just think about those two curves, the curve of the back of the hand and then the curve of the knuckles from the front view, if you get those in place with a rounded, flat piece of clay, then that's quite a bit of visual information that you have to build off of. Let's do the thumb, which is kind of a drumstick shape, kind of this meaty part of the palm. We're just going to do a drumstick shaped piece of clay, add that in. And I also usually have this go to and be a representation of the first knuckle of the thumb. So that's the first knuckle of the thumb. Quite a few muscles that make it up, but it ends up being kind of just this rounded muscle mass. Primary form of just a drumstick. Yep, and then another little teardrop or drumstick shaped piece of clay for the pinky side, going down the pinky. And you can see just with those masses, it's already starting to look and feel more like a hand, even though we haven't gotten very far at all. We haven't even posed it really yet. So let's do the last meaty teardrop shaped form that I like to lay in is this in the back of the hand.
And so I had this different...
I'm going to add a little bit of clay on the back of the hand just to make sure that this doesn't come off too much and keep those knuckles in place. Now that we have that, let's go ahead and pose the hand into the fist. And I'll do more of a clenched fist. So this is somebody that's right about to punch, you're right about to punch something, or you're angry, you're clenching, and so everything's pulled tight. And what happens when you do that is the pinky is actually pulled down. There's a little muscle inside the pinky that's connected to this bone. It's right there, and then connected into the middle of the hand, I think along this bone. I forget the name of the muscle. There's so many muscles to the hand. But it pulls the pinky down and in. It's not connected up here. It's actually connected here, and then it rolls the fist. Here you can see it a little bit better, that it rolls that pinky down a little bit to give a little bit more curve on the back of the hand. Get some of that information going. So the first finger will be the highest up, or the one that's curved a little bit. So this one is angled at about this angle, and then the next one comes a little bit lower, and then the next one a little bit lower, and next one a little bit lower. So there's this cascade of angles as it moves down the hand. And if you're not aware of that, and you just try to make the hand just flat here on top, it's going to look strange because it's actually rolling. And if you imagined it as a plane, if you just put a flat piece of paper on all of these, it would be a plane that's kind of rolling and twisting through space as it moves down. So these are little things that you don't think about until you're actually observing the hand, and it just comes with experience. If you just took 2 weeks and did a hand sculpture every day, let's say you just set aside an hour of time that you usually be on social media, but you just decided you were going to learn hand sculpting. So 1 hour every day, and if you just did that for 2 weeks, you would be shocked how much better you'd be at sculpting the hand. If you do that, I hope you still take advantage of creating a free account over on Proco.com and posting so that other people can see your work, because that is helpful for other people, and it also helps for like critique videos and things. I like to see your guys' work, and I like to be able to give pointers myself. I try to give pointers as much as I can whenever I see that people comment their work over there. And so I hope you guys take advantage of that, even if you're not in the full course. And it is free to create an account, free to comment those things. Okay, so I've kind of laid in a little bit of the thumb and the first finger. And as I'm bending the fingers into these joints, it's easy to get overwhelmed. So just try to focus on one finger at a time and compare it with the surrounding fingers. With the first one, I'm able to just compare it to the back of the hand. The back of the hand will be about aligned with the wrist. This is a little bit wider than a 90 degree. A good rule of thumb is avoid 90-degree angles, like if you can, because we always want to make everything a 90-degree angle. If it's close, like we see like the jawline or something, we want to make it a 90-degree angle because we just, for some reason, we just really like that 90 degree. But almost nothing in the body is an exact 90-degree angle. So if you err, I would say err on the side of pushing it away from 90 degrees. I looked at it from this way, and then I'm going to think about it from this way, so changing it 90 degrees to where I was observing it before, and say, is it coming in from where that first knuckle is? And for me, it seems like, yes, it is coming in a little bit, because the tips of the fingers are a little bit more narrow than the knuckles on the back of the hand, and so they're actually tapering. The whole hand is tapering as it moves towards the inside. And so this inside is going to be just a little bit pushed in compared to that first knuckle. Now let's go ahead and move on to the middle finger. Because we're going to pull that down, we're going to kind of exaggerate that a little bit more. So I'm just going to add this in right now, and then we will change those fingers later. But we'll just push that in. With some things, like for example here, the middle finger that's kind of rolling onto the inside, it's not that sharp of a angle, what I have right now. And I'm not too worried about that because all of this is going to be buried in the fist. So you actually won't even be able to see the armature. It's all going to be buried in this area. So I'm really focusing or trying to get as much as I can these points accurate, because the stuff inside the palm is going to be a little bit buried. So thinking about that and the stuff that you have to worry about and the stuff that you don't, I think is also helpful. Another thing is that if you're going any smaller than this, like this is, what is this? Like this is 1/3 life size. If you're doing smaller than that, it's almost easier to sculpt without an armature, because sometimes it does just get in the way. So let's go ahead and bend these last ones in, and remember that angle is changing as we're moving down. It's at this angle, and then as we move down the hand, it's moving down farther and farther. Let's actually even exaggerate it just a little bit. So that knuckles like comes up a little bit more. This one's maybe more neutral, and then this one comes and something like that. And then the pinky is really doubled in on itself, more in towards the inside of the palm. So let's push that in. Let's see. Then I have it a little bit too long. The distance of this phalanx, I guess it's called phalanx. This part was a little bit long. I'm looking at the thumb. I'm saying, like, what angle is this? It's kind of pointing like off, away from the knuckles, up and away. And then I'm gonna look at it from this angle and see, how does this bone right here compare with this bone of the thumb? They're kind of converging. If you followed those lines, they're kind of tapering towards one another. And right now I feel like I don't have that as much. So I feel like the thumb needs to be maybe lowered a little bit, and then it comes up a little bit. So something like that feels just a little bit better. So let's go ahead and continue the development of the fingers. This is what it's looking like. Kind of get a sense of where everything is, but it'll get more detailed as we go and start to add some clay to it. So the first thing is just covering up the armature, thin layer of clay. I'm going to also thin out the muscle masses that I've added in because I like to add those with little pieces of clay, and if I start too thick then it can become too blocky too fast, so I'm just kind of squish things in, and that way I can be more thoughtful of where I put these masses of muscle. Yeah, and I'm going to make sure that this pinky is tucked in enough. That's the nice thing about having this this clay here, is when I move the pinky, it moves the other fingers along with it. Okay, we've got the back of the hand. It's actually thickened the wrist up a little bit. So I'm just covering things up right now, trying to make sure I'm not losing the pose. So if I need, I'm gonna like place my finger inside to keep that curve of the back of the wrist in place. Just move things around, simplifying at this stage. We want things to be fairly simple. It's just like, oh wow, this is so much information that we just, once you know it, you just take it for granted. You don't even think about it. Right now, I'm getting the back of the hand, trying to keep the rhythm, the curved rhythms that I've put in. I'm going to start laying in some of the anatomy and the forms, but before I do that, I feel like some of these fingers aren't curved in exactly the right way because I do want them to all taper as they move in towards the palm. It's not a big taper. Like, you could be forgiven for thinking that these are parallel with one another, but there is some taper. And when there's, like I said, if there's some, then exaggerating to be a little bit more is better than ignoring it, ignoring those little subtle details. So I'm going to kind of push the taper a little bit more. Let's go ahead and add, I'm just going to add in a bunch of clay inside so that it doesn't move around too much as I'm working. So now I'm going to come in, going to add a little bit for the ulna. There's a little bump there. Let's go ahead and take a piece of clay and say, this is the ulna. Hello, ulna. Welcome to the sculpture. Right there. Now that I've placed the ulna, I'm like, oh, this is not looking right. Like this, the distance from the ulna to the pinky, that's way too long. It doesn't feel right on the sculpture. And so I know that something's off. It either has to be the pinky or the ulna. It's easier to move the ulna. So let's go ahead and move the ulna up. And that way we can say like this is a little bit higher up and also kind of curving around that muscular mass of the pinky. So these are just things that you're checking, constantly checking, looking at your reference. Let's see. So now, okay, let's go ahead and look at the fist from this angle. I see that there's like an extreme divot in here. Let's just go and start adding in these muscle masses. This one's really like squished. It's like a big kind of chunky, rounded muscle mass. And then it's also bulging out a little bit on the backside on this part right here as well. So we're going to also bring that around because it's kind of squishing all of that over. Even though when your fingers extended or when the pinky's extended, it becomes more flat there. But then as I tense it, you can see that kind of bubbles out just because it's pushing everything past that that bone that's on the back of the pinky. So that's looking a little bit better. Same thing with the thumb. There's a bunch of mass in here. We can add. And then remember, try to avoid 90-degree angles. So if I had to lean one way or another, do I want to lean this way or this way? Let's go maybe this way where the pinky's coming down a little bit farther, as far as where the end of the mass of the muscles on the pinky side or the thumb side. So let's go ahead. Well, actually, I might like the thumb coming down just a little bit lower. That looks okay. Because then, you know, this is coming kind of this way and the fingers are coming down that way, and so it just kind of breaks up what's happening. Yeah, that's something that I've discovered, that sometimes there's a way to abstract things or take out pieces of information that makes it actually more interesting. It makes it more visually pleasing. One style that I really like is what I call hyper anatomical. There's such a definition in the understanding of the bones and the muscles that you know that the reference did not look like that. Like, you just know that there wasn't people that looked with like their like bones actually coming out of the surface and the knuckles, like each of the forms of the knuckles. Like, it wasn't that those forms weren't that way from the reference, but they had such a understanding of the figure and the anatomy underneath and what was happening underneath, and they were able to imbue their sculpture with that information. And it just, to me, it seems like such a more interesting way to do it. So whether it's pulling out information or simplifying, maybe you simplify it in a way that also I think there's also beautiful ways and interesting ways to simplify things and remove information, but both of those take knowledge and study and an eye for what looks good, what feels right. I get a benefit from all of these things that people that came before built up. There's so much knowledge that we have available to us right now that we didn't discover. Like, I didn't discover, that this was a teardrop shape. Like, I wasn't the one that learned it, or I wasn't the one that discovered that it's about halfway between the tip of your finger and your wrist is where the first knuckle is. Like, those little things that masters pass on to students over the ages, we have more information now about those types of things than ever before in history. And there's so few people that appreciate it or take advantage of all of the knowledge that we have because it's difficult. There's so many distractions. You could spend your whole life just passing time with all of the distractions that we have. But taking some time to create yourself and being one of the people that builds things, I think is just a really valuable thing. And you just feel better when you do it. Let's see, this knuckle, I'm looking at it, it's really thick. So I'm just going to add some thickness here. And I'm trying to start and work my way in with little masses of clay and just continue to build out towards the thickness of the fingers. So this is what it's looking like.
Yeah.
It gets easier as you do it. There is something about just the roughed out stage where you can see where it feels like, oh, this is on the right. This is headed in the right direction. That's always a good feeling when it comes to a sculpture. Let's see, and there's kind of this muscle mass that bulges out right here. Just pulling things out. You're hopefully starting thin. That's what I recommend for any type of sculpting, any type of additive sculpting. If I could only add one more piece of clay to make this just a little bit closer to what I'm going for, where would that one piece of clay go? And then if you can just think about that and consider it from each angle, like what is missing from this angle? If I just like look at it from this angle and say like what's missing? Well, I can see that there's a little bit missing in the thickness of the wrist. So I can take that one piece of clay and add it into the wrist, make the wrist a little bit wider. And if you just treat each piece of clay like that, then each piece of clay becomes more valuable because you're more thoughtful with what you're adding. Let's go ahead and come back and add some of these fat pads. Okay, let's see. Some more thickness in right here. Those fat pads are just kind of squishing out like around these areas. This fat pad of the finger, these fat pads. Trying to think about like what is happening. And then pressing them out. There's going to be a little bit of a wrinkle. If I feel like, sometimes there's just like an area where you feel like, oh, there's this mass right here, but I added it as one mass, and I'd like to just give a separation between those. So you can just come in with a tool and then add just something small just to say like, oh, this is two separate masses instead of one. That's like all I would use the tool for on these type of quicker gesture study type sculptures. Let's see, and then I feel like the back of the hand needs a little bit of roundness. So as your like that hand is flexed, it does blend out like all of this anatomy that's on the back of the hand. It kind of smooths it out because the fat pads are actually pushing up against everything, and so it is a little bit smoother than with some other poses. So let's go ahead and indicate that by just putting some clay in and smoothing it out. Anything that you study kind of starts to blend in with other things that you like. And so like one of the things I like is just exercise. I like going to the gym and exercising, and I was thinking about almost everything you do is exercise. So if you think of sculpting as like an exercise, like this is an exercise. This is like every piece of clay is a rep, and maybe every sculpture is a set, and you might not notice the improvement by the time you finish a couple reps and a couple sets, or even you do a couple reps, a couple sets, a couple sessions for a month, and you might not see a difference. But then if you're consistent with that and you just keep doing it consistently, if you do that with physical exercise, then you really do start to see the benefits. And the same thing is true with anything. And so that's definitely true of sculpting. Each sculpture is an exercise. That's one of the things that I like about Instagram. A lot of people talk about like, oh, you shouldn't Instagram, you compare yourself so much with other people, so frustrating. But I was like, that's one of the things I like the most is seeing other people's work. I try to just follow people where I would be happy if I had created something like that. And so that's kind of the standard that I have of the people that I try to follow for inspiration for art. And I like following all kinds, like drawing, painting, or sculpting. And so that comparison, it can be something that holds you back. I'd say if it gets to the point where you get frustrated and you don't want to draw or paint or sculpt because you're so frustrated about how far behind you are. But I think using that comparison to just say like, oh, okay, well, they figured out a way to do it. So maybe they just know something I don't, and maybe I could learn that. And then maybe it would be like, maybe I could sculpt something like that if I just understood what it is that they're thinking about, or what it is, the techniques that they're using, or the practice that they've put in, or whatever it is, taking it in a positive way and saying, oh, well, they did it, like maybe I could do it. With these courses that I built, I hope that I'm able to like share a little bit of what I've learned, and then I hope people go and just create awesome things that the education that I provided was just a small part of helping them get to the point where they were able to create something that was beautiful and masterfully done, and that makes the world, I think, just a little bit more of a beautiful place to be and a more of an interesting place. And I think that's a great thing. That's why I really enjoy teaching almost as much as I enjoy, the sculpting itself, because I like seeing people and students improve and do something that they couldn't do before. I find that very exciting. I learn something, and then I do something and I'm like, oh, there's no way I would have been able to do that, a year ago or a little while ago. And so that's the kind of the thing that drives me forward to always be learning just a little bit more. Let's see. So this is coming along, but you can see, so I'm just going and adding structure, adding one piece of clay at a time, thinking about where could I add it to make it just a little bit closer. But most of the proportions and everything were in place when I built out the armature and then posted. So if you can get that far, I think most beginners, if they take their time, if you take your time and just make sure that the armature is proportioned correctly and posed correctly, take a little bit extra time at that stage, then getting it to this stage where things look more developed and more skillfully done is a whole lot easier. I'd say like getting the most out of the sculptures, and especially these gesture studies, just having that thought, yeah, where would be the best place that I could possibly add this one piece of clay just to make it, if I had to like turn the sculpture in to have it be judged from the teacher or whatever, like after this one piece, where would I put it? And I think that is kind of a helpful thing to think about. Usually you want it warm, or I like it warm, just like holding it in my hand is sufficient body heat to get it to where I like for these types of sculptures with this particular type of clay. But usually at the beginning I want it even softer if it's a larger sculpture so that it goes faster. Just because the harder it is, the slower it goes. But you want it to go slow later on in the process because you don't want to be messing up the details that you've already added in. Yeah, I do save my my studies. In fact, most of the ones, if I really like how they turn out, I almost always save the clay original. And then I just get more clay for whatever next project I need. Having a cheap clay is helpful for that. That's why I do use, I like this clay. This clay is my favorite right now. If you can, save the clay original, just because you never know if you might want to make a mold and cast it. If you don't like the original, or if it's just something where it's okay, and then you do one that's maybe a little bit better, then I just say reuse the clay. That's kind of what this is for. I wouldn't want people to not do a sculpture because they, like a past sculpture is too precious and they don't want to mess it up, and then they lose out on the chance to learn something because they're holding on to the other sculptures and they don't have more clay. So I'd say if you can get more clay and that's not an issue, then do that. Or take a mold and cast it, or just use polymer clay and then just bake them so that you have all of the studies finished and you're able to line them up afterwards and kind of see your progression through it. I think that's a cool idea. Polymer clay is a little bit more expensive than this stuff that I use, but you get a finished sculpture that you don't have to cast You don't have to mold it or cast it. You just bake it in the oven. So that's the benefit. This muscle, I'm going to push up a little bit more into the fingers. The fingers are like a little bit more buried inside of this thumb muscle. And this, the fat pad of the thumb is kind of this, I'm seeing kind of a triangular shape a little bit. Right there. Ooh. Sculpting is kind of a slower process generally. Let's see. Yeah, very rounded on the back. Very rounded all the way around. Let's see. I'm trying to see where is it missing some clay. So I'm seeing in here, this isn't really like a concave space. When you squish, everything's very close to the surface right here. So there's this skin fold that's wrapping around. So let me go and add that a little bit more clearly. These are things like if I was sculpting without using my own hand as a reference, these aren't things that I would know or think to mention right away, but then I see them on my hand, and I'm sculpting and I'm like, oh, like this, like if I was sculpting by myself and wasn't using my hand as a reference, I probably would have put it down here, this transition. I probably would have removed some of this mass in there. But then if you're using yourself as a reference correctly, then you're constantly checking to make sure that you're on the right track. Looking a little bit better. It's feeling pretty good. It's getting there slowly. And then I'm going to look at where the transition, like where the separation of the fingers begins and how that kind of curves. Again, curving rhythms, curving down.
Do you think at this stage you would still be doing?
As much as I can, I always try to build out the forms by adding clay. And the reason for that is that I've just found that when you're removing clay with a tool, it's a lot harder to get the soft subtlety that is the human form, the forms of the hand. Those forms are a lot harder to build up by tooling, with tools, with removing material, than with adding material. Which is why, that's why stone sculptures are so impressive, is because you are removing material, and it's just so hard to find those forms when you're removing materials. As much as I can, like I give an indication of this separation by adding clay right next to the separation, and then I say like, oh, there's that. Now there's that separation. Like I didn't have to go in with my fingernail and add that separation. I just added it by adding a piece of clay where the finger was, if that makes sense. And so that's usually what I try to do with these types of studies, is almost entirely by adding and not by subtracting. Let's see. So there's that one. And then if I want to get rid, like here, I feel like the transition starts a little bit lower. If I want to get rid of that crease, then I just put in some clay in between and then kind of blend that together. Something like that. And then it kind of removes that crease. I mean, I could end it, I could finish it, like this. Like this feels like a decent study. I could take it just a little bit more. Like there's just a couple more details that I would continue to add in. I might like go in and kind of solidify what's happening with the knuckles and things like that. But it's the same thing that I've been doing this whole time, of just taking, a little piece of clay, usually smaller pieces of clay at this point. So at the beginning, you're able to kind of put on big chunks, and then as you wind down, you get smaller and smaller pieces, and you're making smaller and smaller adjustments to make it just a little bit better. That's the whole point of that's the whole process of sculpting. It's just one piece to make it just a little bit better. Like making pieces, seeing what people like, seeing what they don't, especially if you're an artist in the position where you're trying to sell and market work, then it's especially important that you find things that connect with investors or people that patronize your art. So I think, let's see, I think I'm happy with it right here. I think that might be where we'll end as far as this sculpture goes. Remember, if you're interested in getting that course, the mini course, it's available, and we're going to start releasing lessons and getting into the assignments. I hope that you guys will do the assignments and follow along. Even if you don't get the course, though I hope you do, I hope that you'll learn as much as you can from the free content that we'll be putting out related to sculpting the hands. The hands are tricky and they're great to practice, so I hope you will, and have some fun doing these types of studies. I really like this, like just as something that could, go on the stand, or you could mold and cast, and could be for holding jewelry or something like that. I just find these to be really fun little studies. So hopefully you guys found some value out of this. Again, I hope you guys can stay creative, stay productive, and maybe I'll see you soon over at Proco.com/handsculpt. All right, thank you guys.